Hello again. Good afternoon and welcome back to Wismatic Virtual Conference. Our next session is designing projects to engage students, their learning styles and spark interest in STEM. Our speaker is Becky Street. Hi, Becky.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. As Caitlin said, my name is Becky Street, and I am from Little Rock, Arkansas. I'm really excited to be here. I've had so much fun crashing your conference today. All the sessions I've gone to have been really great and informative, and I hope that I can share something with you guys today that will spark some of your interest, as well as possibly things you could do with your students. So over the last several years, I've been trying really hard to get away from the basic homework and test model in my math classes, and I know that's hard because we have required material that we have to get through so often, but I've started adding more projects and I've really enjoyed it myself, and I think my students have as well. And I'm very happy with the progress that they've made. So all the projects that I'm going to touch on today are all works in progress. They have definitely gone through many iterations, some worse for the wear. But I think most of them are getting to a point that I'm pretty proud of, and that's why I wanted to share them with you today. And the ones I'm going to talk about are mainly designed for college algebra and quantitative reasoning or math reasoning, but I think that the subject areas could actually be applied to lots of different levels of math. So the problem that I've been working on is how can I provide students with meaningful projects that promote interest, deep learning, exploration, and innovation. And so my goals are these. I want to try to scaffold those projects to promote growth mindset and also to anticipate and allay any of those pressure points that always pop up along the way. I think the more we do a project, the more we realize where those pain points are for students. And mainly I want to empower students to use their skills and experiences to solve problems from the real world. And I think this last one is a big ask, but it's the one I keep going back to. I find it really motivating. So, where to start? This part is not project specific, but I do want to make a quick plug for meeting our students where they are. This pandemic has been really hard on our collective mental health, but a recent article from the Chronicle points out that student mental health issues actually have been on the rise for years, starting long before COVID. So most likely these numbers aren't just going to suddenly go down when the pandemic is over. Hoping it's over one of these days. So I think it's more important than ever to start off each semester by addressing these concerns, because we can offer our students really great curriculum, but if our students don't have their basic needs met or their mental health needs met, then it doesn't matter how great our course material is. So I've recently started using this statement of hope in all of my classes, and it was inspired by Dr. Monica Linden. She's at Brown University, and I have a link to her work at the end of this slideshow in case you're interested. It's really motivational, I think. And in it, I talk about my hope for creating a good environment. I talk about pronouns, and I also include these QR codes that are just links to resources that our school has. Students pay for so many things with their activity fees, and often they're told about those kind of resources, maybe during orientation, or I know we post them on our website, but sometimes I think students forget about them once classes are underway and they start getting stressed. I love to see my students' reaction to this. I had one student this semester who confided in me that he does have food insecurities and had no idea we had a food pantry. So it felt gratifying to have even just a little small part in maybe being able to help them. If you don't use something like this already, I would totally encourage you to. I've had a really good response from students with it. Okay, so next I use a little gamification to create a sense of inclusion in the classroom. I've never considered myself much of a gamer, but I am a total sucker for those apps that use gamification, like Duolingo. I don't know if any of you guys use that, but for years I've tried to learn French and I always give up. But since I've started like playing around on Duolingo, I am totally addicted. I'm certainly not fluent at French, but I'm doing better. And I think a lot of that is because of those simple gamification techniques. There's something fun about creating an avatar and earning badges and moving up on a leaderboard. It's kind of weirdly inspiring to me, and I would love to create that in my own classes. So I think that for students to have the chance to pick an avatar to represent themselves is a way for them to feel like they're seen in the way that they want to be seen. Some students just flat use their own picture, selfies. Some of them have like amazing selfies, but a lot of students will create an avatar or do a photo of Yoda, whatever it is, to kind of represent themselves. And I think that there's some comfort in that for some students. And badges can make students make a real connection between what they're doing, what we're learning in a class, and what the outcomes I really want them to learn. If you look at these 6 little colored boxes, these are what my badges look like, but they're all based on Bloom's taxonomy verbs. And I do that to try to help students understand the connection, like I said, between their work and what I want them to learn, and also to understand that math is about so much more than just number crunching, right? I want them to critique and defend and debate and to know they're doing that, to recognize it when they're doing it. So at the beginning of every semester, I always ask my students to create their own avatars. A lot of them already have one. It's funny, but there are so many great free avatar builders that they can use out there. And I think it's a great way to encourage students to express themselves. And again, I can't say this enough, it allows them to have some say into how they are seen by others. And to get kind of that leaderboard feel, I always create a Hall of Fame so students can show off their avatars and their accomplishments. This is just one page of many for a class, for instance, but it's super easy to create your own badges. There are built-in badges on a lot of free platforms already. And also to create a Hall of Fame. This Hall of Fame I created on Canva. I love Canva. And I do my badges on there as well, but there are a lot of other free platforms as well. I've seen people do them on Google Jamboards, where each student will upload their information on a different board, and Padlets. And so once students have shared their avatar and what they prefer to be known as, and I also encourage them to share their email, but they certainly don't have to, I can add badges along the way. And this is also a great way for students, particularly if you have a hybrid or online class, to be able to get the contact information for someone else in their class if they need to try to find a study partner or work together on a project. Some of my students could care less about badges, they just don't even care, but a lot of them are really into them, and I even have some who get mad at me if I take too long to upload their new badges. But no matter what, I think the point is it's important for us to create those opportunities for our students to feel seen and acknowledged when they do good work. So let's get to some project-specific ideas. I want to make sure that all of my projects promote growth mindset. So I want every project to contain challenges and to increase their interest span, which I think is better than just attention span. I like to have obstacles to normalize their struggles, feedback along the way so they can foster listening and being heard. So feedback from both me and from their fellow students, and to give that as well. Reflections, I want them to have some insight to think about things and not just take everything at face value, of course. And then collaborations to promote positive interdependence. And because I mainly assign these projects in core math classes, most of my students don't have much experience in the way of scientific research. And so I was very lucky to have a librarian at my school create a 10-minute video that she tailor-made specifically to my first project that I do each semester, kind of outlining the basics of scientific research, like using lateral reading to verify sources. And I think it's added a really nice component because there's some critical thinking that's involved. The sources that my students end up citing are much better now that I've started doing this than they used to be. They're not just doing everything from Wikipedia, and hopefully they're gaining a skill that will help them in their subsequent classes. So if you have librarians at your university, take advantage of their skills. It's pretty amazing what they can come up with. Okay, so this summer I worked with an awesome team from the National Institute on Scientific Teaching. I don't know if you guys have done anything with them, but I would encourage you to attend their stuff if you can. It's awesome. But we kind of created a blueprint of things that we want each project to have that may reach some of these goals, the growth mindset goals, as well as inclusion goals. And so the first thing is to get hooked. I want my students to get hooked on a topic, to create that attention span or interest span. To do some think, pair, share. John Oakes talked about this earlier in his IBL lecture, and I think it's an amazing thing to do. I want them to analyze, to investigate, to innovate, collaborate, and then communicate their findings. So this is kind of a blueprint that I've tried to apply to projects that I've used in the past and some that I'm coming up with right now. So let me show you a few of those. A few years ago, one of my coworkers discovered this really great YouTube video about the use of shade balls on a reservoir in LA. And it's from Veritasium. And if you've never seen his videos, I would encourage you to check them out. He has a lot of really great science mathy videos that are done in a very fun and compelling way, and students love them. But we built an entire project around this for our math reasoning course. So here's kind of our hook, or at least a little taste of it. Oh no, the volume's not, oh, there it goes.
These are shade balls. They're being dumped into this water reservoir in Los Angeles. And
my video is kind of acting weird, but basically what he goes on to say is, contrary to what most people think, these are not used, they were not used in this instance to stop evaporation. So in 2008, if you've never seen this before, California dumped 96 million balls. That alone is cool for a student to see 96 million of anything, but they dropped them into a reservoir, and they did it to reduce the bromate levels in their drinking supply. And this video is very optimistic. It shows kind of the process that the scientists went through to come up with this solution and showing why it is a good idea. Now, it turns out there ended up being some pretty negative unintended consequences, and they no longer use these shade balls, at least for this reason. But at this point in the project, I only introduced my students to this kind of concept right here, and that's the get hooked part. Oops, clicked the wrong button, I apologize. Okay, but for the think, pair, share, what I have them do, I have two different versions really. This is the synchronous version. Depending on if I have students that meet in class or on Zoom, or I also have a version for my online. So in this is for when my students meet in class or on Zoom, and we watch the entire video. I think it's like 12 minutes long maybe. And I asked them to participate in an online poll, just wondering like, what's their first gut reaction to this? What do they think? They break into small groups to discuss their thoughts, and then we come back as a whole, the entire class, and each group shares their thoughts. And then we rethink a little bit. I give them the poll again and say, hey, did your mind change? Do you feel even more positive about what you first thought? So it kind of gives them a chance, like I said, to think, pair, share, but also to reflect. And then for my asynchronous classes, I try to achieve the same basic idea. I use a Padlet. I use the free version of Padlets. And basically, I ask students to post at least 2 pros and 2 cons, and then, of course, comment on each other's posts. So it basically works like a discussion board. Okay, so now that I've presented them with this real problem in LA and this real solution, I asked them to imagine that our local reservoir has the same type of problem. And they do things like calculate the number of shade balls that would be needed to cover our reservoir, the amount of water that would need to be to manufacture those shade balls. And we talk about cost, indirect. And this is the standard number crunching part of the thing. I assign it to them relatively early as a low stake assessment so that we can correct any mathematical mistakes they may have made at this point. And it gives us a chance to kind of work through that. And next, I asked them to dive deeper by reading an article that points out some of those negative unintended consequences of using these balls. In the first iteration of this project, I used to just dump all of this information on the students at once, both the good and bad. But I realized that by doing that, though, I was actually denying them a kind of important stage of discovery, right? So now I start off by presenting students only with the video and let them work through those first steps of the project with just that knowledge. Of course, some students didn't take it at face value to begin with and did their own research right off the bat, which I think is amazing. But most of them don't do that and don't see that there may be some negative consequences until I point it out. So I wait until this point to introduce them to the fact that, guess what, there are some big, real problems with shade balls. And this is an important step because just when my students thought they had a good take on these balls, they received new information. And this is where students usually have a real aha moment because this new information forces them to reevaluate something they thought they already understood. And it can cause some real cognitive dissonance too, because students often chafe at accepting new information that conflicts with their existing beliefs. So now I've had my students think about, analyze, investigate, and rethink about this problem. I then ask them to take a stand. Are they for or against these shade balls? And to pick a role. I want them to look at what they've learned so far, and they're going to have to, in some way, present to me an argument for or against the use of shade balls. And then I ask them to think of ways in which they are most comfortable expressing themselves. And I think this is part of that inclusion thing. Are they someone who usually always makes TikTok videos? A lot of my students do that. Or they prefer to post some rant on Twitter. Some people just like to be quiet and work behind the scenes. So students can basically choose their own adventure regarding the role they play when reporting their findings. The second low stakes assessment comes in the form of an elevator pitch. I ask students to think about the new information they've received and to try to dig even deeper. And this is where that STEM research module from my librarian comes in. I ask them to find additional credible sources that inform and then support their point of view, and to create a brief, persuasive pitch describing their take on the shade balls issue. This is an example of a gallery walk. This was just my students did last week. Some of them, I have them post their pitches on a Padlet. Some of them will have video embedded where you can hear them talk. Some of them you actually have videos where you can see them talk. But it's basically their short pitch at this point, whether they're for or against Padlets. And they do a gallery walk by looking through each thing and commenting. And it's pretty fun to see what they come up with. And the things that they originally considered to be major pros and cons often drastically change during this process. And it's gratifying to see how they can arrive there through that communication and collaboration. So their final project is to create a newscast, if they like making videos, a newspaper editorial, like a letter to the editor, or a letter to the City Board of Directors detailing their position on the use of shade balls. They have to include relevant data, of course, and article citations to support their position. And it's really cool to see what they come up with. Here is an actual final project from one of my students named Brianna. She actually just turned this in 3 days ago and was nice enough to let me share this with you guys. She chose to write an editorial against the use of shade balls in our local reservoir, and she did a great job supporting her position with data. And she also included a really clever alternative solution to the problem. We don't really have a problem in our reservoir that I know of, but it was pretty cool to see. And I love it because just this project alone hits on so many of our student learning outcomes for this course. They're comparing, contrasting, interpreting, analyzing, forming critical arguments, and communicating with data. So another one of my favorite projects is about sentiment analysis. And the hook for this project is from hedonimeter.org. And if you've never played around with this website, you totally should. It is so friggin' cool. Starting in 2009, every day they take a random sampling of 10% of all of the tweets that are posted, and they delete all of those stop words like the, and, or. And the words that are remaining, they give a happiness rating to them. And so then the average daily happiness ratings are then graphed and correlated to real-world events. So Christmas Day, for instance, is always one of the happiest days of the year, according to the Hedonimeter and, by extension, Twitter. And I show students this list to give them some idea of how words are rated. The highest rated words are like laughter and happiness, and the lowest are terrorist and suicide. And we dive a little deeper into where they came up with this algorithm. It's pretty fascinating. And a lot of rich discussion can be had about this. Like, how do you quantify qualitative data? We talk about how this just represents a very specific subset of society. These are Twitter users, right? What does that mean, if anything? And I love to show students this comparison. So this is the beginning of 2015 versus the beginning of this year, 2021. And according to the Hedonimeter, the saddest day in the entire 2015 was when Zayn left the band One Direction. And that day still had a higher higher happy rating than most of the days so far in 2021. We talk about what that means. Maybe back in 2015, people didn't take Twitter as seriously, and so it was more for entertainment purposes. Now people use it for news more. But it's really interesting way to get students to think critically about what this type of data could possibly represent. I next asked them to pick a topic that interests them and do some web scraping of their own. I don't know if you've used this website, but Social Searcher is a great free site for scraping the web. And in this example, you can't see it probably in much detail, but I just did a search for social media mentions of Bitcoins, Ethereum, and cryptocurrency. And you can get all sorts of great data and information from it, and it updates daily. And so notice here, for instance, the sentiment for cryptocurrency is currently more negative than positive on Twitter. So I asked students to use tools like this to try to find ways to quantify sentiments of their chosen topics and to tell some compelling stories using data from social media. And I have them create an elevator pitch, and they explain their ideas and sometimes find teammates to collaborate with. And it's really fun to watch because students get really attached to their ideas. And their final projects are fascinating. Here is a snapshot of a gallery walk from one of my classes, and the topics were all over the place, from like BTS pop star people or whatever to suicide, but the stories that they're able to tell are very compelling, and I think they learn a lot from it. And having a final product like this in one of my classes is totally new to me. I'm used to having just normal, regular tests. So here are a couple other short ideas that I have been fine-tuning. One I love to do is about microloans for women in Bangladesh, showing how like really small investments in both time and money can make a huge difference. And I ask students to imagine that they have a set amount of money to invest in microloans locally, and they calculate interest rates and ROIs and ways that they can mitigate on defaults. And this is great for a college algebra class, particularly when you get to the exponential function part. There's a lot of number crunching, but also critical thinking as well. I also love to do a project on bikes in Amsterdam. There are actually more bikes than people there. And I don't know if you've ever seen any of their parking decks for bikes, but they have huge ones that can hold like 10,000 bikes at a time. It's crazy. So we talk about the huge effect on the culture of the Netherlands that bikes have had and how it's changed their, traffic flow patterns, gas consumption. And I asked them to imagine that they're trying to get local commuters in Little Rock to switch from cars to bikes. What if we were trying to get 20% of the commuters? How could we do that? What would it cost? What changes would we have to make? Now, I live in Arkansas, so that's a really hard ask. It's never going to happen, but it's a fun project and students just love it. And we're always telling our students that math is involved in everything, right? So I think if you can find a compelling story, it's so easy to build projects around them because there is math involved in all of this. My students have definitely been more excited about these projects than anything I've ever shown in a textbook before. So I know I'm running out of time. I'll just say this really quickly. I've had increased student attendance and engagement, decreased DFW rates. Students have stuck with it more. They're much more fun to grade because everyone is unique. Grade distribution, the pie chart at the top. On the right, the blue and green shows the A's and B's. So the first time I did the shade ball project, I was so happy that many of my students got A's and B's, but if you look at my latest iteration, it has grown a lot, which I love. This word cloud is just something I had students do to ask what word they thought of when they thought of shade balls, and the number one word was fun, which that's me doing a little happy dance because I rarely hear that in my math classes, so that was very gratifying. Project details, this is the shade ball one. I do a Google Doc so that students can comment and ask questions like in real time. And that fluidity allows me to clarify because no matter how great I think my steps are or instructions are, there's always something that needs to be fixed. Here are resources and references. And I want to thank you guys for listening. If you're interested in the slide, maybe Caitlin can post the slide deck link to you. Maybe there's something in there that you'd find useful, but again, thank you for listening and would love to answer any questions or hear what you guys do if we have time.
We do. If anyone has any questions for Becky, please enter them into the chat or turn your video on and ask her directly. Thank you so much, Becky.